Thank you so much, all of you, for coming and to hear me talk. I very much appreciate it. I must tell you, first off, I don't really know much about Ladakh. I spent many years in Tibet, and much of my perspective comes from Zhung and the other side of the border. But of course, I'm deeply interested in Ladakh. But most of my time has been in Tibet, so I really don't know that much. So I'm hoping to learn from you also. You see, for over 100 years, Ladakh studies have been dominated by foreign scholars. I mean, even before the time of Franke, there were English and other Europeans that came and wrote a little about on Ladakh. Of course, Franke, of course, is very well known. And even in more modern times, much of Ladakh studies has been dominated by Western scholars. And you know, basically, I think that has to change. I think the has to now move to you. You must take charge of your own culture. You must take charge of the study of your own culture, its traditions, its history, its monuments. It really should be in your hands. People cannot passively allow someone else to write their history, even if they do a very good job. So what I want to do today is inspire you to continue the work. Right? I'm more than 60 years old. I've done so much. I have still so much to do in Tibet. So I'm really hoping, so I don't need to come here and do work. I'm really hoping that you will carry the baton forward, and I'll show you some ideas. I'll give you some ideas on what might be possible. Before I start my talk, I think something that's very important, and I think really this should be taught in the school, is Ladakh, but we know often it's said the old name is Maryul, right? Usually written as Maramar. And right here, as I say, it's the oldest reference we have to Ladakh. You see the Dadak. Now we don't have the Dadak, but we see in these early, especially in earlier forms of Old Tibetan that we have written, it uses this Dadak. You'll see it in many early manuscripts. Now, the other interesting little bit of this is just kind of like trivia, but I think it's important trivia. Yul, of course, we all know Yul. This is Tibetan, and we have Mar here, Mar. This Mar is a Shangshung word. It generally known to mean gold. We have some dictionaries, old Ziksut in Shangshung and Tibetan. The most important one would probably be the Zupuk, believed to have been written in the 8th century by Drenpa Namka, a Bon saint, and then revealed later in the 11th, 12th century. So we have these bilingual text lexicons in Shangshung and in Tibetan. Now, so that's that. So I just that's just a little side note for you. So this is Tibetan. This is Tibetan Yul. We all know Yul. And Mar, of course, is from the Shangshung language, generally mean gold, but maybe also meaning excellent or very good, maybe like Sangpo or like this. Having something very precious. It's meaning something very precious. So I just want to give you that sidelight, because there's so much to do, and there's so much to study, and slowly, if you work regularly, you can build up. As you can see, my main area of study is ancient period. I'm very interested in the pre-Buddhist period and the early Tibetan Buddhist period. So this is really the foundation. If you think of a building, think of this building here. This building stands because it has a foundation. Mungji, I don't know if that's use that word in Ladakhi, but it has a foundation. So really that's the early period. The walls then are your history. The roof is maybe the glory of the Buddhist and the Muslim in the modern period. But the foundation is mostly buried. It's not well known. But without the foundation, you wouldn't be here. And that includes your language. Your language is a very old form of Tibetan. And actually, I was looking at this dictionary. It's a fine effort. This is a new dictionary that came out recently. They're called Rangskit. And I was looking for words that might be from Shangshung language. I was a little disappointed. They're hard to find, but they seem to exist. So the only one I could find, is a bit of a side note before we get started,
was the word tiri. La tata kiku ti, ra kiku ri. Tiri, it means a balu, a dwarf, a little kind of man, spirit about that big, right? Like Balukar, you know, Balukar and Khalse, right? But there's another word in Ladakhi, tiri. And this looks like a very ancient word to me. I could be wrong, but it looks very ancient. And if we go through this dictionary very carefully, we might be able to find other words from your older languages, so-called Shangshung type languages. Another one that you all know is lakse, I think in Leh for the apricot kernel. I don't know if that's Shangshung or not, but it's an interesting word. But there are a lot of words in medicine and whatnot that are very old, come from various languages that in Tibetan in Sovikpa, in Tibetan medicine. So they're not necessarily, lakse is not necessarily Shangshung, but words like tiri are very interesting for balu, for dwarf. And there are other old words too. I mean, as Sonam Wangchuk briefly mentioned, tea for water. I was very disappointed to see they didn't have murti, for spring. And we find these words in Ladakh, we find these words in Spiti, and we find these words in Gugay, particularly in Western Tibet.
So, to study, what kind of possibilities are there for study of ancient history? Well, there are some major areas, and you'll see it on the paper. We can look at historical linguistics, archaeology, textual studies, ethnography. And all of these fields will provide information on your ancient past. What I want to do, I want to just briefly go over this, and then I want to start giving you examples of each thing in Ladakh, as much as I can. So we already talked a little about historical linguistics, the origins and development of a language, of the Ladakh dialect. This is not an easy field because you need to have a basis in linguistics, but also you know your own language. So even if you're not a linguist, you can do much. Like I said, I just got this dictionary today. We just bought this afternoon. I started quickly going through, and I found tiri for balu, for dwarf. I'm sure there's other examples, which leads me to my point. What's very important now, very, very important, is to collect your language, the words and the ideas in your language, because especially from people more than 70 years old, so people 70s, 80s, 90s, in the villages, they have a lot of old vocabulary that some of you may not be that familiar with, because maybe you went to, obviously went to school, and maybe were in Delhi or down country for many years. But it's really essential before this old generation passes that you collect, your language, your words. This is a wonderful effort by two Westerners, but it's small. And we have even other dictionaries, like for Helena Norberg did a dictionary. I think Frankie had some words. But we need a much more complete survey of your language, a lexicon or a zixu. This is essential because once this generation passes, you're going to lose a lot of your language. And it's interesting words. It's little words for things in the field, in the shinga, in the house, little things that you make. You'll find a lot of very special words and very ordinary things, right? And so this should be an absolute top priority. In every part of Ladakh, people should you work together and collect as much lexical, many words as possible before they disappear. Because when they disappear forever. And if you want to know the truth, if a people has a language, they can survive almost anything. Once a people lose their language, they're lost. A very good source for ancient words is place names. It would be very good for, if you have students or yourselves, to go everywhere, all over Ladakh, every valley, and what's the name of that mountain? What's that river? What's that rock? Sorry, Tibetan, I don't really know much of Ladakhi, but I can understand a little. Right? And collect all of these place names, because there'll be many ancient words. And some of these names are very ancient. Even some of the village names, even today, are very ancient. And if we get that, we might be able to create a linguistic map, and we can see the relationship between ancient Tibeto-Burman languages, Indo-Iranian languages, and Indo-Aryan languages, right? And Turkic. Remember, the Turks developed around the 4th century AD, but we know particularly Baltistan had very strong links with Turkestan, and of course that reverberated in Ladakh too.